Thank you. All right, welcome to the January 7th workshop. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Nordby,
Here.
Councilmember-elect Woods,
Here. Here.
Councilmember-elect McKenzie,
Hello, me here.
Councilmember Schwer,
Here.
Mayor Monge.
Here. Thank you very much. Can I get a motion from one of the city council members for the agenda, please?
So moved.
So moved. Councilmember Norby.
Second.
Second. Councilmember Schwer. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thank you very much. Topics.
Thank you, Mayor. So our topics tonight are kind of council and its powers, role of council members, open meeting rules. And I thought it'd be more appropriate to turn that over to Jack from Campbell Knutson, our city attorney, and have him go over those. And then we also have Dan, Finance Director here, Winnick, who will be going over just a high level of budgetary stuff. And then what's left over, we'll kind of talk about what current projects are going on around the city and leave any time for council if they have any requests or wanted more information or good things that pertain to them coming on new that they could suggest, and we'll accommodate. So I'd like to turn it over to our city attorney, Jack Brookbanks.
There you go. Welcome. Quiet, Ron. You'll be up next if you peep up.
No, the mic's live. Okay.
All right. It's Mayor, council members. Hello, especially I introduced myself to the two new council members, but I'm Jack Brooksbank. I'm the city attorney, Campbell Knutson. I'm here to talk to you about kind of some of the basics of the legal framework of your new role as council member or old role as council member, in case you need any refresher on these things. I have a few bullet points to go through here, kind of laying out the ground rules. This is to be helpful to you, so if you have any questions at any point, feel free, jump in, ask questions, try and stump me. It's always fun. So just kind of dig in. Overall, I will see, kind of going through this open meeting law, data practice, conflict of interest, gift law. The overall theme of this is going to be these are very kind of functional rules. These are sort of how you behave as a city council member. And that it's based on sort of, it's a hard look at what is happening with the actions more than, sort of labels or that thing. And it can be a little, tricky, a little counterintuitive if you haven't been in government service before. So again, we'll kind of run through some of these things. The goal of all of this is to promote transparency and good government. I'm going to kind of run through, again, as with a lot of laws, there's also a lot of exceptions and sort of specifics to a lot of these things. I'm going to try and kind of run through at the high level, give the general rules of this thing. And then I also just want to just kind of keep emphasizing that if you ever have any specific questions, specific things that come up, if anything ever doesn't quite smell right, you're always free to ask, reach out to our office, to send me an email, give me a phone call, kind of get the specific answers for some of these things as well. So starting with open meeting law, and again, kind of especially with the first two, the Open Meeting Law and Data Practice Act, that I'm going to run through. These are about, public decisions should be made in public. And so these are transparency laws. And so it's always sort of the focus is on keeping that transparency. So open meeting law, the basic rule is meetings of the city council have to be made in public. Where it starts to get a little confusing is that, again, it has a very broad kind of functional definition of what a meeting is and what a decision is. So a meeting, essentially, is any time there is a quorum of city council, which is 3 of you, talking about something that could be related to city business. City business is incredibly broad, so that's basically any time the 3 of you are having a conversation. That's a meeting. That meeting has to be open and noticed to the public. Again, some specifics if you have questions about that, but in general, so that means that, other than scheduled city council meetings and, official city council workshops, city council events, we don't want the members of the council sort of talking to each other about city business. A particularly important thing to be aware of is they call, serial communication or a serial meeting, which is, if Jason sends an email to Troy and then Troy sends an email to John, that's now 3 council members talking to each other about city business, and that counts as a meeting. So we particularly want to beware of the reply all button, and that also counts for social media posts. So again, the general, make your lawyer happy advice is try and keep communication about city business to kind of official channels. Particularly, social media, if you sort of run into people at events. One thing that we will do frequently is if there is some kind of special event going on, fire department open house, or some of the History Cruisers events, some of the events around town. If multiple council members want to go to that, we'll just put out a meeting notification that there will be members attending. And so it's, as long as we have advance notice, we can put out the notice and you can attend the events that you want to go to. But just make sure that you're staying in touch with, with our office, with Brian, if you plan to go to any kind of local events, just to make sure, we don't want to have, there's an art fair and 3 of you show up and now, whoops, all of a sudden, we should have sent a notice. It's not, if it is truly an incidental, you all happen to be at the grocery store at the same time, that's not really a problem, but we want to err on the side of more transparency. Overall notice requirements, again, it's just it's a public posting of that a meeting will occur. It's usually at least 3 days in advance. So we do have our regular meeting schedule. So that's first and third Tuesdays of the month. We just have that schedule that's posted. We don't have to put any additional notice on that. Anything that's not one of those meetings has to get a special meeting notice. And again, that's, we need to talk about something else. That's 3 of us want to go to the same conference. Meeting is very broad. There are some circumstances where you can have a meeting that is not open to the public. A meeting that is not open is creatively called a closed meeting. And then there's a certain things that we have to do there. I think there's a list in your materials here. Labor negotiations, litigation stuff, anything that counts as attorney-client privileged, real estate, counteroffers, sort of contract negotiation stuff. In a lot of cases, we can have a closed meeting where the public is not present. We then have to record that meeting, and then once the information is sort of over with, so we can develop an offer, if we're purchasing or selling real property, we can develop an offer confidentially on what we want to offer to make sure that we can negotiate in good faith. But then as soon as, that purchase closes, we then have to release the recording of the closed meeting. And that's fairly common with closed meetings. The exception here is attorney-client privilege. We do not have to make any record of, because that's an absolute privilege. But just kind of to keep a heads up of, even when it is, a closed meeting, there is still the possibility that, that will be made public, and so we want to be keeping that in mind. There are potential penalties. The penalties largely apply for intentional violations of the open meeting law. So I would ask that you please do not intentionally violate the open meeting law. And that can be up to $300 per occurrence, and that is paid by you personally. The city cannot pick up that bill if that is assessed against you. There's also some potential exposure for attorney fees. The city can pay those, but again, the potential fine on you personally if you're trying to get around open meeting law. So again, if you have any questions, if you're not sure if it counts as, is this a meeting? Do we have to post a notice to this? Just shoot me an email and we can figure it out and make sure that, we're doing everything above board. Again, 3 intentional violations of the open meeting law, and you could actually be removed from office. So it's, $300 is not the most money in the world, but it can be serious, and we want to, avoid that where we can. Moving on relatedly, so the next part here is Data Practice Act. So this is a transparency forcing kind of a statute. The idea is that not only does the official decision has to be made in public, but sort of the underlying data and information held by the government also should be available to the public. Again, these are some kind of broad functional type of definitions. So government data is all data collected, created, received, maintained, or disseminated by state or local government regardless of form. So that includes emails, that includes emails from your personal email, that includes text messages from your personal phone if those communications are about official business. So if you are texting another council member about what do you think about this vote or something to that effect, that is discoverable public information. Someone could request that. We will have to turn that over. This is something that I won't say people necessarily get in like a lot of trouble about, but do frequently, there are some embarrassing stories that people have had from other cities about, being a little overly candid or, making jokes or kind of disparaging remarks, thinking it was between themselves, and then whoops, it turns out actually all of that is public and has to be released. So again, just being really mindful if you're communicating about city business as, an elected official on behalf of the city, just being mindful about the content of that. The general rule is if it is an official email, assume that it will be read by the entire public. And then you can sort of never go wrong with that.
So is the best practice there for all communication to be done through city channels then?
Yes, so that is the best practice, is just,
Keep personal email, personal phones and things like that out of the equation?
yes, that is the best practice. And that is why, in particular, you have an official email address, is so that, it makes it sort of pretty clear that way that, if it's sent on the city email address about city business, that's sort of separate from your personal email. And then if we get a request for your emails or your text messages, if you can just say, no, I have never sent a personal, I've never used my personal email about this, then it's much easier, there's a lot less scrutiny. I don't have to go digging through your email inbox to see kind of what's going on with that. So that would be the best practice, yes.
For myself, if I get emails that want to talk, they ask me to talk to them, I usually come in and sit in the conference room and call on the city phone.
Oh, okay.
I don't get a lot of those. Most time it's just email responses, but when it does come, would you please call me? I usually come into the city and call.
Okay, makes sense.
And if you do get, if you have some community member who knows your personal contact info, and so you get an email on your personal email, I would just forward that on to your official email and then reply from the official email.
Okay, makes sense.
The way that these become, sort of available to the public is people can make a Data Practice Act request. The city has forms that enable anyone who wants to come make a request. They have to specify what they're asking for. We put together the request. There isn't necessarily a specific deadline. It's a reasonable amount of time, but we try and turn these around as quick as we can to get that data out to people. In general, all government data is, by default, public information. There are certain classes of information that are then restricted. So things like personnel data, so employee performance reviews, that kind of a thing. That is the kind of thing that might remain, sort of sealed. There are certain types of data, including certain types of law enforcement data that are available to the subject of the data, but not the public at large. And then there are certain things, including things like active police investigation data, that are sort of not available to anyone. That analysis happens once a data request has been received. That's sort of on the back end. It's not necessarily something that you need to be aware of. But again, just kind of 30,000-foot view, keeping that in mind, that the general rule is all government data is public, unless there is a specific rule that it isn't. Well, conflicts of interest. Conflicts of interest, again, this is kind of a broad transparency, good government. The rules on conflict of interest are fairly straightforward, fairly common sense. There's a statute that says if you have a personal financial interest in something, there's restrictions on what you can do in terms of official city business. There's different rules for if the city is making a contract with someone versus sort of non-contractual situations. Difference there might be, so a contract is if the city is gonna hire someone to plow some streets, or hire an employee, or hire someone to run the cameras for city council meetings. Be sort of more contractual type stuff. Non-contract might be naming public facility. If we're going to name a public facility after someone, it's not necessarily a contract about that, but it's still going to be an official action. So there's slightly different rules. If there's not a contract involved, it's a little bit, there's a little bit more flexibility. But in general, again, just if you think you might have a conflict of interest, talk to me about it, let me know, talk to Brian. We can figure out if it's within the definitions and how we respond to that. In general, there are going to be procedures where if you do have a conflict of interest, that conflict will have to be disclosed. Then the remainder of the council will have to, basically take a vote to say, yes, we can. The rest of us can consider this without any, bias. And then the vote is made without any discussion or participation from whoever has the conflict of interest. Again, that's kind of in general. In specifics can vary. So again, just kind of letting us know. Even though the process to kind of mitigate a potential conflict, to have that vote anyway, will involve abstaining from the vote, just being here and saying, oh, I'm just going to abstain from this vote, is not generally good enough if you have a conflict of interest. So it does have to be disclosure, action by the rest of the council. Generally speaking, we'll have you go sit out in the hallway, finish up whatever that thing is, and then call you back in. So just kind of a private, I'm not going to vote on this one, usually isn't good enough, and can potentially, again, have damages for the city, could potentially even invalidate city actions taken if you are participating as an interested party. And that interest is fairly broad. So that includes, if the city is doing business with your employer, or if you have an ownership interest in some entity that the city is doing business with, it's a fairly broad definition. Likewise, kind of continuing this theme, gift law, interested person, which is just sort of anyone who might have an interest in a city decision, which again, as I kind of mentioned earlier with city business, is potentially anybody. Cannot give a local official is all of you. Any gift, cannot request any gift, cannot give anything of value. Again, this is kind of a common sense, bribery. We don't want any kind of quid pro quo happening. Again, sort of the pitfalls include that this is a very broad definition. So thing of value includes, travel, includes paying for your food, can include, sending you to a conference or having you attend at a conference. And again, there are some exceptions for these things. In general, you're allowed to take sort of nominal. If you're at a conference and someone has a bucket of pens, you can take a pen. That's not considered a gift. But I believe the cap is something like $5. Anything that could be worth more than $5, generally no. And even then, we want to be good government, we want to be good stewards, we want to avoid even sort of accusations of possible, possible conflict of interest, possible under-the-table dealing. This is not usually, again, the kind of thing that people get in a lot of trouble about. It's usually fairly clear, but again, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out, feel free to let me know. There are exceptions, again, we can usually work with you if there's something, they can't, it's a gift if someone sends you to a conference, unless you are legitimately a speaker at the conference, and then you can accept some kind of remuneration for that, as long as it is, if you're presenting on something you have some expertise in, we can kind of work to make sure that it's not overly disruptive of your life, but we need to know and be aware and stay on top of these kinds of things. In general, there's the ability for the city to accept gifts, and that is, it is the city that is accepting the gift, so it is a city council. It must be accepted by a 2/3 vote of the city council. I believe that is 2/3 of the entire city council. So if you are, if you're at a meeting and a city council member is not there, you potentially could need all of the city councils who are there to get to your 2/3 vote. Again, it's usually not controversial, but that's kind of where it is. Where this one starts to, kind of get a little fuzzy is the city can accept gifts. No official or department of the city can accept gifts. So if someone wants to give, donuts to the police department or something to that effect, they cannot give it to the police department. They have to give it to the city, and the city can, then sort of accept it as the purpose being going to the police department. So it does have to be kind of routed through the city in that way. So that's the kind of, that's the potential getting in trouble. I can come up here and wag my finger at you. Does anyone have any questions about anything at this point?
I will ask you to expand upon the open meeting law. Just to give an example, let's think of a positive example. It was my birthday on Saturday. As long as no city business is discussed or talked about, and people happen to know I was at a bar, could 2 other city council members have stopped by and bought me a beer?
I believe so, yes. So again, sort of incidental, purely social type events are generally going to be okay. Again, as long as there is genuinely no discussion. And so, again, this is sort of where people get in trouble is you see someone out and about, oh, hi, how's it going? Sort of the pleasantries, and then you say, oh, how about that meeting last night? Right? Well, now we have a meeting going right now. So just kind of being aware of what's going on and really being studious about not talking about city business.
Thank you.
And then, as well, so, kind of going off that, if you think you have something where there needs to be additional meetings, if there's unfinished business, if you need more time to discuss something, city council members can call for another meeting to happen. And then again, we post that notice, has to be at least 3 days of published notice, and then we can host another meeting. So it's not that big of a threshold. It's not a particularly disruptive or hard thing to do to get more meetings. We just have to make sure that we're doing that in advance. All right, well, so now we can kind of move on to some of the less strictly legal, but just kind of talk through kind of how some of these things go. So talk about role of the city manager. So North St. Paul is a city manager system. which is it's one of the ways that cities in Minnesota can be set up. You will sometimes, especially if you're talking, I work for a bunch of different cities, you might sometimes hear me talk about city manager versus city administrator. City administrator is sort of the other main system that cities operate under. North St. Paul is a city manager system, and that is sort of, the manager has more authority, more responsibilities, more power to handle the day-to-day of the city. So in general, it is set up so that the manager is responsible for kind of the operation of city government, and then the council is here to, kind of provide direction and make those high-level policy-type decisions. So the city manager is sort of the chief administrative officer, is appointed by the city council, can be removed by the city council, and sort of reports to you, but other than going through the city manager, you don't necessarily have any involvement in, hiring, performance review, any of the kind of day-to-day employment stuff going on at the city. That's all Brian, that's kind of his purview. And then your job is just to give Brian directions about, at the high level, where do you want to go? So, Brian does report directly to you. There are, you kind of do performance reviews. If you've looked ahead at tonight's agenda, you will get a preview that City Council does city manager performance reviews, and then sort of doubling back then to the open meeting law, we then have to read a summary of that performance review into the record at the next meeting. So that's kind of how the city council interacts with the city manager. And then the city manager is providing, sort of information, helping to set the agenda for city council meetings, answering your questions. And so that's kind of the interaction between city council, city manager. City manager also handles sort of all of the department managers, setting up, managing all the departments, electrical, public works, all of that. Again, that's sort of city manager side. And then as well, any sort of purchases and contracts, anything up to $20,000 is handled entirely by the manager. Anything over $20,000 then requires council approval, but it is still, it's still signed by city manager on behalf of the city. Anything you want to add while we're here, Brian? Yeah. So, and again, this is all kind of the high level, how everything, works. On to my final topic of the evening, everyone's favorite, Robert's Rules of Order. So this is kind of the procedural rules. This is kind of the overview, rules, motions, what order the motions get resolved in, primary and secondary motions, other motions. It gets a little technical. In general, the important thing to know is that when we're in a city council meeting, the mayor or acting mayor will be running the meeting. They're sort of in control, they're the chair of the meeting, they're kind of in control of the agenda. They will, sort of call an agenda item. There will be, either a motion or some discussion. Once there is a motion to make a resolution, adopt an ordinance, send some direction to staff, then that motion has to be seconded. Then there is another sort of final opportunity for debate, and then you can call a vote. There's sort of secondary motions. There's things like, well, we said we were going to do this, but we actually want to amend this, or we want to table this to the next meeting, or kind of modify it, something like that. Those are kind of secondary motions. Not all secondary motions need to be seconded. Many of them still do. In general, how it works is you decide on what you're going to talk about, and then you talk about it, and then you take a vote on it. Other than that, things can start to get technical, and it's not really that important to, Do you take a motion to limit debate before or after a motion to a recess? It's not really that important that you know that off the top of your head. I will fully admit I do not know that off the top of my head. I have a nice little cheat sheet of what order we go in. These rules are here just to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to be heard on everything that the council is doing as an official action. So if you ever feel like you are not having an opportunity to be heard, again, there's various sort of procedural motions for that. And that, again, is sort of a great time to look over my way. I get a lot of questions along the lines of, here's what I want to do, how do I do that? And ultimately, the council as a body has the authority to set, make, and enforce its own procedural rules. So something isn't working, or you would like to do something a different way, or you'd like to get some more direction on something, for the pre-existing members, you could set a rule on what it takes to add something to, a formal process to add something to council meeting agendas, or something like that. That's something that you can do as a body. So again, if these rules are ever not working for you, let us know and we can kind of work around them. But that's kind of the general, again, this is the 30,000-foot crash course about a lot of laws that you will hear about and talk about for the remainder of your time on city council. I know I've just thrown an enormous amount of information at you, and I'm always here if you have additional questions, if anything comes up, if you, a couple weeks from now, you go, hey, Jack, I just really didn't understand this other point. I'm always here, I'm always available to answer those kinds of questions, help make sure that, everything makes sense about your new role or your old role. If you have any further questions?
I had a quick question for you, Jack.
Yes?
So it's my understanding that is it a general rule of thumb, or is there an actual procedure as far as getting something on the agenda? Is it like two council members come together, and if you have two or more, or is it?
So there's general rules of thumb. North St. Paul does not currently have a formal rule about that. You could make one if you wanted to have a formal rule. Generally, the rule of thumb is if somebody really wants something to be on the agenda and there is space for it on the agenda, we should add it to the agenda, is kind of the general rule of thumb. If there want to be a more formal, submit something and is that seconded, and that's sort of up to the council to decide if you want to make that a more formal process. Informally is nice because it's flexible. Obviously, having formality gives a framework for, if someone wants something to be on the agenda, if someone else doesn't want or wants something to be on the agenda at a later meeting or wants to talk about it at a different time, having a formal rule sort of enables, a clearer idea of what to do in that situation. I would, again, kind of leave that to the council on if you'd like to adopt something like that.
I would like to ask a favor from you, because the first time I had to email Soren, it took me a while to find his email. Would you please send us all an individual introduction email, just so we know your contact information?
Yes, I can do. I can actually, when I go sit down, I have business cards as well. So I'll make sure you all have my card, so that you have a physical copy, and then I'll send you all an introductory email as well, just so that you have, and that'll have my email and my office phone number on it.
Just don't hit
Thank you.
reply all.
Yes, no reply all.
Start with. Yep.
All right, well, seeing no particular further questions, and again, I'm sure these things come up. There's not always clear answers. So just let me know if you have any questions down the road. Otherwise, thank you very much for your time. Thank you for running for office. We appreciate it. It's a good council. They're fun. And I'm sure I will continue to see you at a lot of meetings.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jack.
There was one thing I wouldn't mind running through, take a couple minutes, is the meeting itself, the agenda. So for the council meeting, not the workshop here, because I think it helps just to understand the outline before we start. So you're on it there. if you guys just want to pop open, because this kind of screwed me up when I first started. So of course, we start out with the roll call, and then we do the Pledge of Allegiance. And if I get your names correct, that's a win for the mayor, because usually I mix them up, so we'll start with that. And then we have adopt agenda. So then that's when I ask for the council members to adopt agenda, so 2 of them do it, then we vote on it. Then from there, consent agenda. That took me a little bit to figure out. So this is all the stuff that the staff, and correct me if I'm wrong, please, has done behind the scenes, and they looked up stuff, and it's stuff where it's ready to go. So what I do is, can I get an adoption to for adoption for the consent agenda? If there was something on this list here, you go, well, I'd like to have some more information on these, you pull it. So otherwise, when we vote on it, everyone that's there gets voted yay, and we move on. So if you decide, I really want to talk about that HRA, so then you'll say, I'd like to pull D. So then we adopt everything but D, and then we go down through, then we go to our open to the public, so we get our 3 minutes for the public. And then we go down to business items. So this is the business item, so now D would fit right under A here. So we would talk about the HRA part of it and then be able to go. So we have to vote specifically on each one of these. So after we're done with this closed meeting, one, we get the update, we vote on that, and then we'd vote on the HRA, because that's what we pulled from D onto here. Then that would have to have its up and down vote for that. So I just wanted to clear that up, because sometimes that consent thing, for me, it was just a little bit to get used to it. So anything you look through that list, we're gonna go through it, and you guys pull out whatever you want. Then it gets thrown down to the city business action items. We discuss it, we vote it up or down, or whatever we need to do, and then we move on to the reports from the city manager department, reports from us as a group here, and then we do general. So if there's something you want to bring, like, we're having, a festival or something you want to bring up as far as general business, or you want to say Happy New Year or something like that, that would fall within the general business. Then I would ask for an adjournment, and then we would get that, and then we'd vote to adjourn. Any questions on that? I just thought I wanted to give that a little clarity for you guys.
That makes sense.
All right, good, thanks.
That's a good point. Thank you, Mayor. I would like to turn this over to Mr. Winnick, our Finance Director, to speak a little bit at a high level about the budgeting process that we've just gone through.
Mayor, council members, and hopefully this comes up. I'm going to kind of give a real high level of some of the city council financial authorities that you have, and budget is a component of that. So managing the city's financial operations, the council has full authority over the city's financial affairs, including but not limited to designating the depositories, levying taxes, adopting budgets, approving disbursement of public money, we call them claims, borrowing money or issuing debt, and purchases or contracts over $20,000 unless authority has been delegated. So the depositories, which will be coming up tonight at City Council, you're required to officially designate, and we've been using for a number of years now Premier Bank as the official depository. And then we also have some supplemental ones that we use for investment purposes, Morton Capital, US Bank, RBC Capital Markets, and the 4M, the Minnesota Municipal Money Market Fund. City Council approves levies, the levies that we have that we just got done passing this past year. There's a general fund levy, there's a debt fund levy, street maintenance fund levy, park fund levy, economic development authority levy, and the housing and redevelopment authority levy. And then City Council has the authority to approve budgets. We have a number of budgets. We have the general fund. We have the Housing Redevelopment Authority, the Economic Development Authority, and then we have proprietary funds and then some other permanent funds, and I'll get into those a little bit more. The proprietary funds are made up of enterprise funds and internal service funds. And an enterprise fund is basically a fund that accounts for activities that there's fees charged to the external user for the goods and services. So they include our water fund, our wastewater fund, our electric fund, a surface water fund, our solid waste fund, and our fiber optic fund. Our internal service funds are where we account for is a fund that we account for the financial of the goods and services provided by one department to another department within the city on a cost reimbursement basis. We have information technology, insurance, equipment, city mechanic, and the building maintenance internal service funds. Some of the other budgets that we approve on a pretty much a permanent basis has been the community center fund, the community event fund, the fire relief fund, the park fund, and the street maintenance fund. City Council will approve the claims. So Minnesota law provides that no order shall be issued for claims arising from the purchase of goods or services until the City Council has reviewed and approved the claim. So you will see that normally they're on every one of your city council agendas. They're usually underneath the consent agenda, and they're separated into claims for the general, HRA, and the EDA. And again, if you see something on there that you have questions about, you certainly can pull it and request further information on that before you actually pass that. City Council approves issuing debt. Kind of giving you some of the higher level examples of debt that there's a general obligation bonds that are the most common type of bonds that are issued by cities. It's general obligation, which means the obligations that pledge the full faith and credit of the city to their payment. That means that the city must use any assets it owns to pay the bonds, including the tax levy. When a city issues general obligation bond, it promises to levy a tax in the amount needed to pay principal and interest on the bonds for their entire term. That tax levy is not limited by any law and is not affected by any other tax the city levies. That's probably, these two that I'm showing you are the most common ones that we issue. We will be starting the process shortly of issuing bonds for the street and utility project for 2025. So that's kind of why I wanted to bring this up so you're aware. It's a kind of a lengthy process with a number of steps. So we will be issuing general obligation bonds. It'll be in two components altogether, but there's a general obligation bond part to it, and then there's a general obligation revenue bonds. That's for the portion that is going to be repaid through our enterprise funds. Mainly it's through our water, wastewater, and surface water funds as it relates to streets. This type of bond is actually just a subspecies of a general obligation bond. These are issued when a law authorizes a city to pledge a specific revenue source. Again, it'd be from those utilities in the city's full faith and credit. In other words, if we don't gather the revenue from the water, the wastewater, and the surface water, then it comes back to the general fund. The city still has that obligation to pay that debt. This is just kind of a snap picture at the end of our financial statement for of 2023, and just kind of showing you this is the debt that was out there at that point in time, just so you're kind of aware of that. And that's part of what the city manager and I have been doing with some of these levy changes for the infrastructural needs is trying to move us a little bit more to a cash basis versus a debt basis component. And you've heard me talk about, I use the rule of thumb that if I go out and issue a bond for $1 million at a 5% interest, it's going to cost me $80,000 for the next 20 years. So at the end of the 20 years, I've paid $1.6 million. But if we had that cash more up front, you would be able to get more of a, a value for your dollar. So we've been trying to make some of the move over towards making that move over towards the cash versus the debt. And then City Council approves purchases and contracts over $20,000. We're a Plan B statutory city, and the city manager has the authority to make purchases and negotiate contracts for amounts up to $20,000. Purchase and contracts over $20,000, unless City Council has delegated the authority, will be brought to City Council for approval. And for the most part, those will be underneath the business action items. unless you've been made aware through a workshop or so forth on a contract and already had discussion, then it may end up being in the consent item. But for the most part, anything that's a large contract, especially if it's like a street project or and so forth, will end up being in that business, so you have an opportunity to kind of discuss it and to get more information on that. And so that's just a real high level of some of the financial authorities that are granted to you. At the end of the day, it is your budget, it's your levy. The city manager is the one who proposes a budget with support from staff, myself, and the other department heads. But at the end of the day, it's your final decision to make on that. And so if there's any questions or if you need additional information, and as we go through the budget process and we go through the bond issuance, if there's any questions that are needed, I don't hesitate to reach out to Brian or myself, and we'll get you the information that you need.
Can you give us a time frame for budget, how you started it, as far as when it starts, when your initial and kind of go through? Because it is our biggest and
It's kind of a little bit difficult because of the financial system that we utilized. And so next week, the auditors will start their audit for 2024. We have till the end of March to close out our books completely. Means we've got all final numbers by the end of March. After we have that, then it allows me to pull over all of the information to go in to starting the budget process. In other words, I can give department heads, city manager and department heads, and for you, well, how we actually did for 2024, which is then a basis point to start building that 25 budget. So we usually like to start the process somewhere in the early part of April, giving our department heads some time to build their budget. And then in an ideal world, by about the end of May, you will have been presented the financial statements for 2024. You accept and approve those. And then we usually start the budget process. Is ideal is that we would start in May. In an ideal world, we have everything done by the middle of September. In other words, you've already seen not just the general fund, HRA, and EDA, but you've seen the capital improvement plan, you've seen enterprise and internal service funds. Unfortunately, since we only meet twice a month, that makes it difficult at times to get through all of that stuff. But again, that depends on what type of level of information that you want to see and be presented with. I always caution, the city council that we really don't want to get into, I call it the weeds or down to the line item. We want to keep it at a higher level to make sure that, one, that the money that we're spending is meeting your goals that you set for the year, and then two, where we're falling out as far as a levy or if there's any rate increases in our enterprise funds, that you have given direction on where that should be. And then it's really the onus is on staff to come back and meet that. And if we can't meet that, we better have a good reason to why we can't, and or what services would have to suffer because of those cuts to make that type of a levy or not to have a rate increase. So ideally, we'd be starting probably about the early part of May with City Council.
we voted on it the last meeting as far as approving the budget.
Yeah, in the middle of September, we usually certify the proposed levy, which sets the maximum levy that we can have. You still have opportunities to discuss it all the way till in December. In December, and I'd like to see that there's a truth and taxation that needs to be conducted, a meeting. That usually is conducted about the third week of November till I think through the first week of December is by statute that rough time frame that it has to be held. I like to have that because that gives the proposed the truth and taxation. All the residents have received their proposed property taxes for 2025. Things can still change. They're based off of those proposed levies that were certified back in September. You get to hear from them to comments, concerns, and so forth. That may weigh your decision to change to some degree what you want to levy for the following year. And so I'd like to have then the final vote to be the subsequent week or subsequent meeting after the truth in taxation. So like this past year, we did it the very last official meeting that we had scheduled in December to actually approve the levies. And again, the levies can go down after September, but they can't go up. So.
Thank you. I'm trying to think of things that I was surprised at
Sure.
when I started, and just the amount of time we actually focus in the different meetings and, you know, the different, I call them milestones we hit at certain times. You did a great job. I appreciate that, appreciate everything you do with that. But it's just to understand that, you know, this is probably one of the most important things we do, and it takes quite a while. By the time you're wrapping up the year, next you start up again.
We're starting up
So,
again.
and there's those, so that was just something that I was surprised at, with how much time and different steps we had that to go through. So thanks for clarifying that for everybody that's new.
And again, it comes down to, you know, that'll be a discussion that you'll have with the city manager to what degree you want to get into things, how many meetings, the cadence, and then the city manager and myself will set that calendar for the year. And again, I encourage not to get down into the line items. Keep it up to where we're looking at what is the proposed levy, what type of impact will that have on our residents? Is it meeting the goals that the city has for taking care of whether it's infrastructure, staffing, all the way through it, and keep it at that higher level part to it. But I give it, in the time that I've been here with the city council has been absolutely excellent to work with. So, and I hope that continues in the future, and I see no reason why it won't. So.
Thanks. Kind of like off of yours, where the, you know, CEO of is Brian, and we're the board. So we're up there, you know, looking at the 10,000 foot and trying to, you know, guide the best we can with ours, talking to the people out there, our residents, and understanding their needs, and we bring them back, and then you guys make the magic happen.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Dan, could I expand a little bit on the CIP and just explain how the capital improvement projects fit in with the budgeting process itself and how we put a lot of effort into a 10-year outlook on that?
Yeah. Yeah, so since the time that I've been here, we've developed, there wasn't a fully comprehensive capital improvement plan. We have developed a 10-year capital improvement plan, which allows us to give an outlook and to see what some of our needs are, which better positions us then to develop, which we've done since I've been here. I've developed for all the major funds a 10-year financial plan. So I roll in that capital improvement plan because the capital improvement plan is really a huge dollar amount of spend that the city's going to have. And roll it into those 10-year plans. It allows us to forecast outwards, see what kind of moves we need to make today, whether it's increasing levies, whether it's increasing rates, trying to identify the needs that the city has based upon, you know, your direction, your goals that you set for the city. But it's to make us more aware so we're not caught at the end that we can't afford this, we can't afford that, or we're forcing ourselves, unless that's the direction City Council wants, to always issuing debt. You know, you can issue debt year after year after year. You have to remember it's there for most bond issuances are 20 years. It's there for 20 years. It starts to accumulate more and more and more. I'm not concerned about us hitting the debt limit. I'm concerned about us undermining our bond rating, which will then drive up interest rates. And it puts a burden that we can't get out from under with our residents as far as property taxes, because that's, you know, one of our main sources that we have for revenue, unfortunately. But the department heads all submit their capital improvement plan items. A lot of it will come from the different commissions, the Park and Rec Commission. It'll come from, can come from the Art and Culture Commission. It'll come from the Planning Commission. That all gets rolled up into one complete document underneath a number of categories. And so we do spend quite a bit of time on that just because of the significant impact that it has overall on the finances of the city. Does that cover?
And they cover like, high dollar pieces of equipment. It might be a plow, it might be $250,000, or we just recently did a building assessment and, the ongoing needs of money that's gonna have to be put back into the buildings to keep them up that we own. So, yeah, the high dollar items really would fall under that.
Another thing that helped me too when I was hearing is we're considered a bedroom community, which is, we don't have much commercial. So the bulk of the tax burden goes onto the residents. We don't have commercial shops, we don't have malls and things like that. So that was something too that was an eye-opener as far as just how we're described as a bedroom community too.
I echo that. I started in July of '21. We went out for a bond issuance. So when you do we were doing a refunding of a bond, and when you do that, you have to meet. We met with S&P. They have a whole bunch of questions. They do the rating. They give you a preliminary report of what their issuance or what they're going to rate you and their reasoning behind it, and they use that term. Bedroom community. It struck me wrong, and I was upset, and then after a while you started to understand what it is when you see that we're over 90-some% of residential versus a small piece of commercial. We have a great we have great roadways and infrastructure all around us that have great access for people to go to and from work. And that's where I think the city's done an excellent job of having the downtown apartments and some of the complexes that have been built in the more recent years. But it truly is that I see why they called it that, but at first it just bothered the heck out of me. I was like, how dare they?
Just a higher level of residential over business, I think. See, some other cities that have a lot of that, and they have a lot better income for their cities. Well, great. That leaves us a little time to kind of go over maybe what current projects are with the city that we are dealing with now. So the property just across the street from City Hall here, we named it Market Street Commons. We went out for an RFP out there to see what we could get for any kind of bites on some kind of development there. The current theme lately has been kind of residential with maybe commercial on the bottom, if you can do that. We also tried that with the Article 7 downtown. The lower level was going to be kind of work-live units. So whether or not it's an artist or an insurance agent or something to that effect, and then they could have living quarters behind it. They had a few people or businesses look into that. Unfortunately, they didn't get any bites. We did turn one more on to them. Hopefully that got some traction. That's my understanding. Last I checked, they're over 50% for filling the place up now, which is great. And they do actually have 3 of the 9 on the lower level that have been rented out for residential. But anyway, across the street for Market Street Commons, the RFP came down at the end of December of last year. We've had some interest in it. Nobody really turned in an official RFP. The market's pretty tough right now. Interest rates are still high. We've asked for maybe put a moratorium on it for a while until maybe the markets come back around. We've done that before for maybe as much as a year, but the timeline that was asked for was much longer than that. So I think it's just going to probably ride it out for a while to see what our economic outlook is going to be for the city and for the banks and for people who making loans and the cost of doing construction now. So that's kind of where that one ended up. We do have another student-built house that's being built right now. It's across from Webster School at 2007 6th Street. They're moving right along. They've got it at the basement poured. They framed it, got the roof on. I believe they got the shingles on it as of this week, end of last week. So they'll be moving on for interior. They're working on the siding now, I believe. And then just to kind of give you an idea, that project has been really good for the city. I mean, it takes care of, get rid of some blight and increases property values around that area. Good home for families coming in. And looking at the last two projects we did, there was a piece of property down on Eldridge, and we bought it, split the lot, and created two different homes there. The first project that was done there, it was almost a break even as far as cost goes. We came out to about $1,500 to the good, and the house sold for $480,000. That property kind of took on some additional costs that maybe the second property didn't, like surveying, some other things that we had in there. The last house that was just sold there sold for $480,000 as well, but we had $437,000 that we were into it on. So that one was a little over $43,000 to the good on that one that we came out. But between the two, as it was bought as a single lot, then split, we had a total cost of all of that for about $44,500 between the two that were sold. The next one that we moved on to over across from Webster, there were some costs that were saved already. I believe there were already utilities that were cut into the property, which is a decent-sized dollar amount, so that will help with that project. It was a little unique property that changed the design on to get it to work there, but I think it's going to be a good project. Moving on to the development we have up there on Delaware and 17th Avenue. We have a local contractor that is building 5 twin homes up there. It's all going to be single level, which will be nice with our aging community that we have. I think single level will be pretty good for some people. Units 9 and 10, which are next to the existing house on the 17th Avenue side. That one's framed, roofs on. I believe they're doing interior now. Is that all closed in with the doors and windows yet there, Ron? Yes. So then they also have the next basement poured. So when they get to that point, they can start framing and going on that one as well. So.
They just started framing a little bit today.
Oh, they did? Okay, great. And the road reconstruction that we will have, that will start this year for 2025. I did send out just a map of that. It's also online. We had WSB, our engineering firm, they had a meeting that they held open to the public on the 11th of December. They kind of explained it all, specifics of what they're doing in there as far as sidewalks, road reconstruction, sanitary, storm sewer. So a lot of good information on there for that. And with that, I just kind of want to leave a little time at the end there that, does council have anything that you want to add that, I know you've been kind of speaking up as we go along too, but anything relevant or anything more that you can think of that would be good for the new council members?
No, not yet, so I'm just listening here.
Yeah. It's going to be good. Absolutely. So we just went out for a feasibility study on that. EAPC is the architect engineering firm that got that. Riley and myself will be meeting with them. The first one will be just a online conference that we'll have with them, just to get the ball rolling, introductions we made, kind of how they'll start, lay out the project of, whether or not it's reaching out to the public, getting information that way, information that we have and give to them to help the process move along. That'll probably be, they're starting it now, it's probably going to be a good 4.5 month process. They will bring back the feasibility of the project back to council and lay it all out for your guys' final decision on where we move from there.
Speak to the amount of money that we were awarded by federal and state.
Yeah, we lobbied the local legislators, and we ended up getting a $4.5 million grant from the state, and we got $850,000 grant from the federal side. So that money is available for this project. Right now, we have the library that's in there. They have expressed interest in potentially more space for what they use it for. And then some of it will just be different ideas coming in from the public that we've had already meetings of possible interest of what they could use the building for as well. So they will compile all of that information and bring it back to you guys to make that final decision. So it's going to be a good process.
Okay.
One other thing, if you don't, I would like to, if everybody can, we used our last piece of property for student build. We were able to fit this one in. Do we got one more? Where's that at?
Down there on 3rd and
Oh,
7th
good.
Avenue.
We weren't sure if that would work or not. Good.
I think so, yep.
All right, so,
Third and where?
3rd and 7th Avenue. It's up at Five Corners up there.
That one on top of the hill.
Yep.
so we weren't sure if that one would go. So it's long and it goes straight down, so could be a walkout with a 12-foot ceiling.
Could be, yeah.
All right, good. So I'll just keep an eye out for anything that comes along as far as we want to put, keep the going. We need to have some property. And I know former Mayor Furlong found the one as far as when he was driving to one, we split the 2 lots to be able to do 2 of the homes on it. So,
Yeah, on Eldridge.
so I think that's a good for all of us to just kind of keep an eye out if we hear anything as far as different ones.
I have a possibility of one, but
Good.
it's gonna be some work to work it out, so.
That's fine. We just keep it in the hopper, and we just keep it front of mind, because this has been a great program when it comes to, for the community and everything else, so,
Yeah,
all right.
please. That is all I have for you right now. I think and I've sent all this information out to especially our new council members. You can review some of that. We can get more into details. We'll probably set up weekly phone calls and try to get into the weeds of everything. So,
That's it. Can I get a call for adjournment, please?
So moved.
Councilmember Norby, second. Second, Councilmember Schwer. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All right, thank you. We got 5 minutes.